Sometimes pretending to be brave is the bravest thing you can do. Chapter 1. The Coward. The vultures always beat him to the dead. Bran crouched low behind a cracked boulder, eyes scanning the field of still smoking bodies. The battle had ended hours ago, but the stench lingered. Burned flesh, blood-soaked mud, and whatever mix of fear and piss men released in their final moments. He hated this part, but it was the only thing he was good at. He waited until the last of the carrion birds took off, startled by some unseen ripple in the air, and then he moved, fast, low, like a rat between shadows. His fingers were nimble, practiced. He took only what could be sold: rings, weapons, unbroken boots. One man's wedding band still clung to his swollen finger. Bran muttered an apology, knowing damn well no one could hear it, and twisted it off with a sickening pop. That was when he saw the armor. It was scorched black, lying half buried in a mound of ash and broken spear shafts. Something about it made him pause. The breastplate had a faint etching of a rising star, half melted, but still recognizable. Bran's breath caught. "No," he whispered. "It can't be." Everyone knew the mark. Sir Calum of Calbridge, the prodigal son who left home, young to chase glory in the border wars and never returned, at least not in person. The stories did. The songs did. He'd become a legend at a distance. And now he was dead, at Bran's feet. The body inside the armor was charred beyond recognition. The helm still clung to the skull, fused in place by fire. The sword lay nearby, blackened but whole. Bran looked around. No one else in sight. His mind twisted. He was born not far from Calbridge himself, left when he was young, much like Calum had. He'd heard the old folks bragging at taverns. "He's one of ours, you know." Calbridge bred the savior of the Eastern realm. But they hadn't seen him in over a decade. No one had. Not since the wars began. And now, here lay the myth himself. Faceless, burned, forgotten. Bran stared at the armor. What if he returned home? It took him nearly an hour to strip the corpse and don the armor. It was too big in the shoulders and heavy as sin. The metal scraped at his ribs, and the helm rattled when he moved. But from a distance, with the rising sun at his back, he might pass. He adjusted the sword on his hip and stood, wobbling slightly. That was when the horns blew. Bran flinched. Riders A patrol. Maybe looters. Maybe worse. "Run!" his instinct screamed. But the armor held him still, and then they crested the hill. 3 soldiers in polished blue and silver, Calbridge colors. Bran froze. The lead rider shouted and pulled up hard. "By the stars, Calum?" Bran blinked. The rider leapt from his horse, eyes wide with something like reverence. "He lives, Knight," the soldier breathed. "He lives." Another slid from the saddle and dropped to one knee. The stories were wrong. The hero returns. Bran opened his mouth, closed it. They didn't know his face. No one did. They were seeing the armor, the symbol. He gave the only reply he could think of. He nodded. Chapter 2. The Return. Bran didn't speak during the ride. He didn't need to. The soldiers talked enough for all of them, trading tales of Calum's exploits like old friends reminiscing, though none had ever met him. He burned down the siege tower at Grell's Keep, didn't he? They say he fought 3 days with a shattered leg and still walked out. Bran kept his head down, the helm hiding every twitch of panic. Each praise felt like a stone added to the weight he carried. He wasn't a hero. He wasn't anything close. He'd run from his first skirmish and spent the rest of the war crawling through the wreckage. But now they were calling him Savior. The gates of Calbridge swung open with a groan of old iron. The town hadn't changed much. Bran recognized the shapes of buildings he'd passed as a child, the crooked chimney of the smithy, the leaning oak in the square, but they looked smaller now. Or maybe he just didn't belong in them anymore. The town, however, erupted. Children screamed his name before he even dismounted. "Calum! Calum!" echoed down the narrow stone streets like cannon fire. A woman burst into tears at the sight of him. Someone dropped a sack of apples that rolled and bruised across the dust. The baker crossed himself and shouted, "The dawn returns." Bran kept still. If he moved too much, if he waved the wrong way, they might see through it. But no one did. They haven't seen him in over 10 years, he reminded himself. They don't know his face, just his name. They weren't cheering for Bran, they were cheering for an idea. The mayor met him at the chapel steps, a short man with a velvet sash too big for his chest and a nervous pinched smile. "Sir Calum," he said, bowing so low his hat nearly fell off. "What a miracle. We feared you'd fallen for good when word reached us of the battle at Daelin's Rise." Bran nodded, which the mayor took as a solemn confirmation. "Come," the man continued, gesturing up the stone steps. "We've kept your chambers prepared all these years just in case." Bran followed, numb. The room was quiet, dusty, preserved like a shrine. A faded banner with the rising star hung above the bed. A single wooden sword rested in the corner, small, like something a teenager might have carved. The air smelled of incense and old books. He peeled off the armor piece by piece. Every clasp was a relief. His skin itched where the metal had chafed, and his shoulders screamed from the weight. When he removed the breastplate, something shifted, a hollow thunk from within. He froze. Tucked in a small, hidden pocket behind the inner lining, nestled in the curve of the metal, was a leather-bound journal, worn, scuffed, and clearly treasured. Bran stared at it. It hadn't been meant for anyone else's eyes, not left behind in some room for posterity. Calum had kept it with him, carried it into battle. He turned to the first entry. "They cheer for a man I don't recognize." Farther in, "I left Calbridge to escape the weight of being ordinary. Now I'd give anything to be just a face in the crowd again. And deeper still, I'm not brave, just loud and tired. But I keep showing up. Because someone has to." Bran closed the book, pressing it to his chest. They hadn't seen Calum in years, but they believed he was still that boy who left them. They believed so deeply it hurt. And now somehow he was the one wearing that belief. He looked at the armor on the floor, then back at the door. He should run, but he didn't. Chapter 3. The Mask's Weight. The next morning someone knocked at the chamber door. Bran froze mid-buckle, the armor half on. His hands smelled like rust and candle wax. "My lord," came a young voice, "the town awaits. They've gathered in the square to see you." He winced. Of course they had. He tightened the last strap, slid the sword into its worn scabbard, and took a deep breath that rattled in his chest. The square was overflowing. Children on barrels, old men leaning on canes, women holding wildflowers in shaking hands. A stage had been assembled, makeshift but decorated with garlands and sun-painted banners. The moment Bran Brafuilida stepped into view, the crowd erupted, cheering, weeping, chanting his name. He climbed the steps slowly, trying to mimic the poise and grace he imagined Calum would have had. The sword at his side felt too heavy, the armor too loose. But the sun caught the rising star on his chestplate, and the people only cheered louder. "Say a few words," the mayor whispered from behind him. "Anything. They just want to hear you." Bran turned to face them. Hundreds of faces stared back, trusting, hopeful, desperate for something greater than themselves. He had no speech, no truth to offer. So he said the only thing that came to him, "You have stood strong, and so shall I." The square exploded. A woman fainted. A child threw petals. The baker dropped to his knees and wept openly. Bran stepped down and walked away, his heart hammering against the stolen breastplate. Later that afternoon he wandered the streets in plain clothes, only the sword still strapped to his side. He needed air, distance, anything to quiet the roar in his head. He paused near the chapel courtyard, drawn by the sound of wood clacking against stone. A boy was sparring alone. His stance was sloppy, his grip awkward, but he moved with wild determination. He noticed Bran and froze mid-swing. "My lord Calum," the boy gasped, nearly tripping over his own feet. Bran said nothing. The boy ran to him, holding out the wooden blade like an offering. "Will you show me how to fight? Like you did against the Hollow Knights?" Bran blinked. "The Hollow who?" "The ones with the smoke masks, from the stories." Bran hesitated. "Ah, yes, of course." The boy's eyes sparkled. "I want to be brave like you." Bran looked at him for a long time. "No, you don't," he said softly. The boy frowned. You're not afraid of anything. Bran opened his mouth to respond, then closed it. What would be the point? The boy returned to his practice, swinging wide and wrong, but fierce. He didn't need the truth. He needed someone to believe in. That night, Bran sat at the edge of his bed, the journal in his lap. He thumbed through the entries again, stopping on one he hadn't noticed before. They love me because they don't know me. They cheer for the armor, not the man inside it. God's help them if they ever do. Bran stared at those words a long time. He was still a coward, still a liar, but that boy in the courtyard hadn't cared. Neither had the crowd. They didn't love Bran. They loved the idea of him, the mask, and for now, it was enough to wear it. Chapter 4. The flame rekindled. The trouble with being a hero was that people expected you to act like one. Bran kept his head down as he passed through the market, armor left behind for the first time in days. Still, people nodded to him, bowed, whispered blessings like he was made of gold and prophecy. He tried to be invisible. It didn't work. It got worse when he reached the bread stall. A shout rang out from the alley, sharp and angry. Bran turned just in time to see a scrawny boy barreling into the street, clutching a sack to his chest. Behind him, a red-faced vendor stormed out. "Thief!" the man roared, and "Stop him!" The boy ran straight toward Bran. He didn't think. He moved aside. The boy swerved but tripped. His feet tangled with Bran's boots, and he tumbled to the cobblestones. The sack burst open, loaves of bread and a pouch of coins scattered in the dirt. A crowd began to form. The vendor stomped over, spit flying. "Rat! Caught you red-handed. I'll have your fingers for this." The boy looked up, trembling. Bran looked down at him, then at the crowd, then at the boy again. And something happened. He stepped in front of the child. "He's just hungry," Bran said. The vendor blinked. "He's a thief." "And you'll ruin his life over a loaf?" Bran reached down, gathered the coins, and returned the sack. He made a mistake. That doesn't make him worthless. The vendor sputtered but said nothing. Someone in the crowd muttered, "Just like in the stories." Another whispered, "Mercy and fire, that's Calum." The boy stared up at him like he was watching a star fall out of the sky. Bran helped him to his feet. "What's your name?" "Kellen." "Kellen," Bran said, "if you're hungry again, you come to me. You don't steal, understand?" The boy nodded like his life depended on it. Bran walked away, pulse pounding in his ears. He wasn't sure if he was shaking from fear or something else. That night, someone left a loaf of honeyed bread outside his chamber door. No note, just quiet thanks. And the next morning, Kellen was waiting by the chapel steps with a wooden stick and big, nervous eyes. "Can I watch you train?" Bran blinked. "I don't train." "But you're Calum." Bran sighed, then drew his sword and slowly, awkwardly, went through a few motions he'd seen real soldiers do. Kellen mirrored them like it was sacred ritual. That evening, Bran opened the journal again. A passage near the back caught his eye. "Sometimes I think if I died, the myth would be better off. They could keep loving the idea, not the man. But then someone looks at me like I matter, and I forget how tired I am." Bran closed the book. He hadn't meant to do anything noble. He'd just reacted. But it had mattered to someone, to Kellen, to the crowd, to the boy he used to be. Maybe it wasn't heroism, but it was something. Chapter 5. Ghosts of the Real Calum. Bran was halfway through a bowl of stew in the town hall when the doors creaked open behind him. "Sir Calum?" The voice was soft but steady, older, familiar, but not to him. Bran turned, spoon still in hand. The woman who entered wore a travel-stained cloak and a sword at her hip. Her black hair was streaked with gray, but her posture was straight as a spear. She closed the door behind her like someone sealing away a storm. "Gods," she whispered, "it's really you." Bran stood slowly. "You are—" "Lysa Vane," she said. "First Sword of Eldwyn. We served together at Blackreach." Bran's mouth went dry. "Shit." "It's been years," she said, eyes searching his face. "I heard what happened at Daelin's Rise. I didn't believe it, not until I saw the armor myself." Bran nodded, his favorite tool. It worked again. She stepped closer, lowering her voice. You look different. Bran tensed. Time, he rasped, and wounds. She nodded, eyes softening. Of course. I shouldn't have expected you to be the same. He sat back down before his legs gave out. Lisa didn't sit. She looked around the room, then back at him. Do you remember that night in the caves near Grell's Ridge? When you told me you didn't think you'd make it out alive? Bran stared. You were shaking so hard you couldn't hold your blade. But then you stepped in front of me. Took the charge. I never forgot that. She smiled, tired and real. You always acted like you weren't afraid. But I knew better. That's why we followed you. Bran's mouth moved. No words came. It's good to have you back, she said, and left him alone in the silence. Later, Bran found her again, sitting in the chapel courtyard, sharpening her blade. You knew me well, he said carefully. She didn't look up. Better than most? Do you think I was ever really brave? He asked. She paused. No. That hit harder than he expected, but then she looked at him. You were scared. Every time. But you stood your ground anyway. That's why we followed you. She turned the whetstone again, letting the silence stretch. The world doesn't need fearless men, she said. It needs ones who show up even when every bone in their body wants to run. Bran didn't respond. But that night when he returned to his chamber and opened the journal again, the words felt different. I am not what they think, but maybe I can be what they need. He closed the book, fingers trembling. The mask hadn't cracked. It had begun to fit. Chapter 6. The Enemy Returns. The wind shifted in Calbridge. It wasn't anything the townsfolk noticed at first. The fields still swayed, the sky still turned amber at dusk. But to Bran, it felt like the ground had tilted under his boots. It began with a messenger, dust-caked, wide-eyed, stammering. A black banner rides the southern road, he told the council. No emblems, just a black banner, and the rider wears a mask of bone. The room fell silent. The mayor went pale. The Bone Rider, he whispered. Bran hadn't heard the name before, but he saw the way the others reacted, the mayor gripping the table, the guards shifting uncomfortably. Caelim's old rival, someone muttered. They say he was the only one to ever wound him. Nearly killed him at the pass of Valmir. He was supposed to be dead, another whispered. Caelim put a sword through his chest. Bran felt cold. If that's true, he thought, then this man's not coming to threaten the town. He's coming to finish what he started, with Caelim. Which meant him. That night, Bran sat alone in the chapel chamber, the armor laid out on the floor like a second corpse. He hadn't put it on since the market incident, hadn't needed to. The lie had carried itself on momentum and myth. But now someone was coming who knew. The journal sat open on the bed beside him. A later entry. Short. Tired. He nearly had me. I don't think I'll survive another fight with him. Bran stared at it. Then why'd you go back? He whispered. There was no answer, just the silence of a room not meant for him. The next day the town was buzzing, people sharpening old blades, fixing fences, talking in tense, hushed tones. They were afraid, but they still believed in him. If Caelim stands, we can face anything, someone said near the well. Bran kept walking. He passed Kellen in the square. The boy was trying to string a bow almost his own height. He looked up and grinned. They say your old enemy's coming back. Are you going to fight him again? Bran didn't answer. Couldn't. That night, Bran stood by the window, looking out over the rooftops of Calbridge, and tried to remember who he really was. Not Caelim, not a legend, just a man who once ran from everything. He thought about leaving, just walking out into the dark, the armor left behind. Let them believe he died, again. But something stuck. That damn journal, that single ugly line. I keep showing up, because someone has to. Bran clenched his jaw. Maybe he would die. But if he was going to die, maybe he could earn the name first. Chapter 8. The People Rise. The Bone Rider said nothing as he approached. The crowd behind Bran was quiet, watching, waiting. No pitchforks, no blades, just faces, fearful, hopeful. Bran stepped forward, sword raised. His mouth was dry, his heart pounding. The armor felt heavier than it ever had. The Bone Rider moved with calm purpose. Not fast, not slow, just certain. Bran swung first, desperate, wild. The Bone Rider caught it with ease. In one clean motion, he twisted Bran's blade aside and slammed a gauntleted fist into his chest. Bran flew backward, crashing to the cobblestone with a choked cry. The crowd gasped. The Bone Rider raised his sword, walking toward Bran without hesitation. This is it, Bran thought, dazed. The mask ends here. Then, "No!" A cry ripped through the square. Kellen. The boy sprinted from the crowd, wooden sword gripped like a torch. He charged the Bone Rider with everything he had. The man turned, surprised just long enough for the townspeople to move. They surged forward, not with weapons, but with fury. The blacksmith threw himself into the fray, tackling the Bone Rider from behind. The baker swung a heavy tray. A group of farmers wrestled the sword from his hand. A mother smashed a lantern at his feet. Dozens overwhelmed him, driving him back step by step. He fought, but not like before. He was outnumbered, drenched in disbelief. He looked to Bran, still on the ground, struggling to stand. Then to Kellen, who stood in front of him, small chest heaving, wooden sword raised again. The Bone Rider turned and fled. Shouts chased him out of town. No one pursued. He never came back. Bran coughed, trying to sit upright. Kellen was at his side in a heartbeat, helping him up like a page helping a knight. "You were amazing," the boy whispered. Bran shook his head. "I got knocked flat." "Yeah," Kellen grinned, "but only because you're still hurt from last time. That was smart. You were luring him." Bran blinked at him. Behind the boy, townsfolk nodded. A few even repeated it. He's not fully recovered yet. Still carried the name. Still stood his ground. Still made that bastard run. Bran said nothing. They made room for him to stand. Slowly, carefully. They didn't cheer this time. They just stood with him. Not as followers, as believers. The lie had become something else, not truth, but something truer than that. Chapter 9. The Echo of the Mask. The Bone Rider never returned. Calbridge healed. Fields grew tall again. Songs softened from war ballads to lullabies. And Bran stayed. He could have left. Disappeared into the world again, name forgotten, burden shed. But every morning, Kellen was waiting. Wooden sword in hand, eyes bright, voice full of questions. So Bran stayed. He trained with the boy every day in the chapel yard, sometimes alone, sometimes with the town's aging swordmaster, an old veteran with a crooked leg and a soft heart. They taught Kellen the blade, the stance, the breath, and Bran learned too, quietly, humbly, at first pretending to correct, then slowly realizing he was being corrected. He read Calem's journal again and again, letting the words sink deeper over time, letting them change him. I am not brave, I am not special, but I can be present. So he was. Years passed like pages in a book. Kellen grew tall, fast, focused. He learned to read winds, anticipate feints, strike without hesitation. His blade became an extension of his thoughts. He didn't fight with anger, but with purpose. The villagers stopped calling him the boy who followed Calem. They started calling him Kellen the Bold. Bran watched quietly, proudly, sometimes painfully. He never told the boy who he truly was. But one autumn morning, after a final round of sparring under the turning trees, he led Kellen to the old chapel chamber. The armor was still there, polished now, revered but no longer needed. He placed a hand on the breastplate. "It's time," he said. Kellen's brow furrowed. "For what?" Bran handed him the journal. "For you to carry the name. Or not. It's your choice." The boy took it, flipping through the worn pages. Then he looked at Bran. "But I'm not Calem." Bran smiled. "Neither was I." He left the armor in the room and walked out into the dusk, feeling lighter than he ever had. Some masks were meant to be passed on, not to hide a face, but to reveal a heart.